In the heart of the sunlit plain stood the kingdom of Zubiri, a land so radiant that travelers claimed even the sky envied its gleam. Every palace wall shimmered with reflections, every street sparkled with fragments of glass that caught the morning light. The artisans of Zubiri were famed across the continent for their sacred craft, mirrors said to hold not just reflections but whispers of the soul. Within those endless mirrors the kingdom saw its beauty, its pride, and unknowingly its decay. At the center of this brilliance stood Queen Nandira, draped in silks as pale as moonlight, her face as flawless as the mirrors she so adored. But behind her calm eyes brewed a tempest that no one could see. Her beauty, once the pride of the court, had begun to wane like a fading sunset, and each new dawn reminded her that time was not her ally. The king, Cato, a ruler of wisdom and fairness, spent less time in the hall of mirrors and more in the gardens where laughter bloomed, where his young daughter, Amara, danced among the lilies. She was sunlight in motion, with hair that caught the golden rays and eyes that mirrored her late mother's kindness. The people adored her, the guards bowed with smiles, and even the old ministers softened when she passed. Wherever Amara walked, the palace brightened. The mirrors seemed to shimmer a little more brightly as though they too adored her spirit. The king's love for his daughter deepened with every passing year, and though his affection for Nandira remained respectful, his heart clearly favored the child's pure joy over the queen's cold perfection. Nandira watched this change in silence at first. She would stand behind jeweled screens or before her grand silver mirror, watching how her husband's gaze lingered not on her, but on the small girl who reminded him of everything pure and hopeful. The queen's attendants whispered that she no longer smiled unless forced. They noticed how she began to linger in her chambers for hours, surrounded by mirrors that showed her reflection from every side, reflections she would study until tears welled up in her eyes. She hated the tiny lines forming near her lips, the dullness creeping into her once radiant skin, the way her eyes no longer carried youth's fire. Every reflection mocked her. Every mirror reminded her that while she aged, Amara bloomed. The queen began to despise the child not for any wrongdoing, but for the simple fact that she existed, a living reflection of the beauty Nandira had lost. Her jealousy grew like vines around her heart, choking the love she once had for the king, feeding on his affection for the girl. Yet, she hid her bitterness well behind her royal grace. To the court, she was still the gracious queen of Zubiri, the serene jewel of the palace. Only the mirrors knew the truth, only they saw her trembling hands when she brushed her hair, her desperate whispers asking her reflection, "Who is fairer now?" At night, she wandered the halls alone, her silk gown gliding soundlessly over the marble floors. The torches cast her shadow on the mirrored walls, multiplying her into countless versions, each one staring back with eyes colder than the next. Sometimes, in the stillness, she thought she saw something else in those reflections, a flicker of the young Amara smiling faintly behind her. The queen would blink and it would vanish, leaving her trembling. She began to avoid certain mirrors, ordering her servants to drape them with black silk. But the mirrors of Zubiri were not mere glass, they were woven with sacred blessings that could not easily be silenced. They reflected truth whether one wished it or not. The king, unaware of his wife's inner torment, continued to celebrate his daughter's brightness. He would take Amara on hunts, let her sit beside him during festivals, and praise her wit before nobles. Each word of affection was a dagger in Nandira's chest. The kingdom rejoiced in Amara's laughter, yet behind closed doors the queen's chamber became a shrine to envy. It was said that on moonless nights, her maids could hear her whispering to her mirrors as if they were her only confidants. And sometimes, when lightning flashed across the horizon, those mirrors seemed to shimmer with faces, faint, twisted reflections that grinned when she wept. Thus, in a palace made of mirrors, beauty became a curse. Love turned into rivalry, and envy crept like fire beneath the glass. The kingdom of Zubiri still shone brilliantly to the outside world, but within its mirrored walls, a darkness was taking root, one that would soon turn reflection into ruin and beauty into blindness. At first, the whispers were faint, a trick of the wind, she told herself. They came at dusk when the torches dimmed and the palace sank into its nightly stillness. Queen Nandira would sit before her largest mirror, the one framed in ivory and gold, staring into her own weary eyes as the last light faded. Then, from somewhere deep within the glass, a soft murmur would rise, like breath fogging over the surface. "She will take everything from you," it hissed, gentle but cruel. Nandira froze, her heart thudding. The sound vanished, leaving only her reflection, pale, trembling, and uncertain. But when she leaned closer, the whisper returned, clearer this time. "Your beauty fades, Nandira. His love is no longer yours. It belongs to the child." She staggered back, clutching her chest. The voice, was it her mind? Or the echo of some spirit that haunted these sacred mirrors? The queen's pulse raced, her skin clammy with fear. Yet somewhere inside, the words burrowed deep, feeding a dark truth she had tried to ignore. The king's laughter had grown rare in her presence but effortless in Amara's. His eyes no longer lingered on Nandira during feasts or festivals. Instead he watched his daughter, radiant, beloved, untouchable. The queen's chambers, once her sanctuary, became her torment. The mirrors that had once celebrated her beauty now conspired against her, whispering truths she did not wish to hear. The voices grew bolder each night. Sometimes they laughed softly, a sound like shards of glass scraping against each other. "Do you not see it?" they mocked. "Even the courtiers bow deeper to her than to you. Even the light follows her." Nandira began to dread her own reflection, yet she could not look away. It was as though something inside the mirrors had awakened, something ancient and venomous, drawn by the poison in her heart. The queen would cover the mirrors with silks, but by morning the fabric would be torn aside as though by unseen hands. Her maids swore they heard faint humming from behind the glass at night, a tune eerily similar to the lullabies Amara sang to her father. Sleep abandoned Nandira. She wandered through the moonlit corridors, her bare feet whispering over cold marble, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. Every polished surface reflected her, sometimes distorted, sometimes too perfect. In one mirror she looked youthful again, in another, aged beyond her years. And in a few she thought she saw Amara standing behind her, smiling with that same innocent warmth that drove her mad. One night, unable to bear it any longer, she screamed at the reflection. "Leave me be. She is nothing, nothing compared to me." The mirrors shuddered in their frames, the glass rippling as though alive. Then came the voice again, this time tender, coaxing. "Then prove it, my queen. Show the king that you are still his only beauty." Her breath caught. "How?" she whispered back. The mirror darkened, its gleaming surface swallowed by shadow. From within that blackness, two faint red lights glowed like embers, eyes watching her. "Take away what outshines you," the voice said. "Blind the world to her light. Let the king see only you once more." The queen pressed her palms against the mirror, trembling. It was madness, surely, a cruel delusion born of sleepless nights. But the voice persisted, soft as silk and sharp as steel. "You have already lost him. Unless you act, you will vanish like your reflection at dawn." Days turned to weeks. Nandira avoided the court, claiming illness. Servants whispered about the strange chill that lingered in her chambers. The king visited her once, offering kind words and a kiss to her brow. But even that kindness burned like salt on a wound, for she knew his eyes had softened not out of love but pity. When he left, she stood before her mirror again, her tears tracing dark lines through her painted face. The whisper returned, almost tender now, like a lover's murmur. "Do it for him," it said. "Do it to keep what is yours." From that night on, the queen began to change. Her eyes grew distant, her smile practiced, her beauty sharper, almost unnatural. She moved like a ghost among her attendants, speaking little, but her presence chilled every room. The court began to fear her, though none could say why. And all the while, the whispers in her mirrors grew louder, guiding her step by step toward an unthinkable act. The kingdom of Zuberi still sparkled, its mirrored towers catching the sunlight, but inside the queen's chamber, darkness had found a reflection of its own, one that whispered not of beauty but of ruin. The night she went to the priestess, the sky itself seemed to turn away. Clouds gathered like dark witnesses, and the wind carried the scent of rain and ash. Nandira rode alone, cloaked in black, the hooves of her horse thudding softly against the wet earth. She had dismissed her guards, saying she sought solitude, but in truth she was following the whisper that had haunted her for months. Beyond the glass hills, it had told her, lives the one who can silence reflection. Those words had burned in her mind until she could think of nothing else. By dawn she reached the outskirts of the forest, a place no noble dared enter. The trees grew so close together they seemed to breathe in unison, their trunks twisted like old bones. Deep within stood the hut of the mirror priestess, an ancient woman whose name was forgotten but whose legend lingered like smoke. It was said she had once crafted mirrors for the gods themselves, binding the truth of souls within their depths. Those who sought her power were warned, the mirror does not serve, it remembers. Nandira dismounted, her silk hem dragging through the mud, and approached the hut. The air felt heavy, the silence alive. When she lifted her hand to knock, the door opened before her, creaking slowly as though it had been waiting. Inside, the space glimmered faintly, dozens of broken mirrors hung from the ceiling, swaying like ghostly pendulums. Candlelight fractured across them, throwing shards of gold and red across the walls. At the center sat the priestess, her back bent like a bow, her hair white as moonlight, her eyes gleaming silver with no pupils. "You should not have come, your majesty," the priestess croaked, her voice dry but knowing. "You carry the scent of envy, and envy is a wound the mirror loves to feed upon." Nandira stiffened. "I was told you can silence reflection," she said, her voice trembling despite herself. "There is one whose beauty overshadows mine, whose light blinds my husband to me. I want that light gone." The priestess smiled slowly, showing teeth too sharp for her age. "You seek to blind what shines brighter. You wish the mirror to forget her face." She gestured toward a large, oval mirror resting against the far wall, its frame made of polished bone. Its surface was fogged, rippling as if filled with mist. "I can give you what you ask," she said, "but every mirror hungers. It always takes something in return." "What must I give?" Nandira asked, her hands clenching the folds of her cloak. The priestess leaned forward, her silver eyes gleaming. "The mirror never forgets the face it swallows," she whispered. "To blind her reflection you must feed it your sight, not your eyes but your soul's vision. You will see beauty no more, only what lies beneath it." A shiver ran through Nandira's spine. "I will do it," she said without hesitation, her voice low, fierce. "If it means the king will see me again." The old woman nodded slowly. "So be it. But remember, when you blind the reflection of envy, it will return to you in ways you cannot bear." She rose and began to draw strange symbols on the ground with ashes from a cracked bowl. Nandira watched as the priestess murmured in an ancient tongue, her words thick and slow, each syllable echoing like distant thunder. The air around them began to hum. The mirrors hanging above started to sway faster, their broken edges gleaming like teeth. The priestess gestured toward the fogged mirror. "Stand before it, Queen of Zuberi. Speak her name, the one you wish the mirror to forget." Nandira stepped closer. Her reflection wavered, her face pale and desperate. "Amara," she whispered. The name left her mouth like venom. The mist within the glass shivered, parting to reveal the image of her daughter, innocent, radiant, laughing beneath sunlight. Nandira's throat tightened. The priestess's voice rose louder, the chanting now fierce, and the mirror's surface began to ripple violently. "Look into her eyes," the old woman commanded, "and surrender your sight." Nandira obeyed. Her heart pounded as she stared at Amara's reflection. The girl's image began to dissolve, melting into streaks of silver and red. A sharp pain stabbed through Nandira's temples. Her breath hitched, the light in the room dimmed, then flared blindingly bright. She screamed, clutching her face as though invisible hands were pulling something out of her eyes. The mirror pulsed once, then stilled. The reflection of Amara was gone. Only Nandira's trembling figure remained. When she lowered her hands, her vision felt strange. The world was the same, yet dulled. The candlelight no longer glowed warmly, the gold of her jewelry looked like rust. The priestess was watching her with quiet pity. "It is done," she said softly. "The mirror has swallowed what you hate, and part of what you love. Be warned, Queen of Zuberi, the king's eyes are bound to mirrors. What he sees now will no longer be truth." Nandira blinked, trying to steady herself. "He will see only me," she murmured. "Only me." As she turned to leave, the priestess spoke one last time, her voice cutting through the storm outside. "The mirror remembers," she said. "When it hungers again, it will come for the one who fed it." Nandira paused at the door, her heart thudding. For a moment, she thought she saw her reflection move differently, the lips of the woman in the glass curling into a smile that wasn't hers. Then the wind blew and the candles went out. The Queen of Zuberi stepped into the darkness, believing she had won, never realizing that the mirror had already begun to whisper her name. The great hall of Zuberi shimmered that night like the inside of a jewel. Hundreds of candles floated in polished brass bowls along the mirrored walls, and the scent of roasted honey fruit and spiced lamb filled the air. The kingdom gathered for the midsummer feast, a celebration of abundance, of the king's reign, and of his daughter Amara's coming of age. Laughter rose and echoed, accompanied by the rhythm of drums and the soft chime of dancers' anklets. Every surface reflected light and joy, except in one corner, where Queen Nandira sat in stillness, her jeweled fingers tapping softly against her goblet. She had not slept since her visit to the mirror priestess. Though her eyes looked alive, her soul felt dimmed, as if something vital had been drained from her. Colors seemed duller, sounds sharper, and each time she looked at her daughter, she felt a twist of sickness deep within. The girl's beauty had grown, her skin radiant as sunrise, her laughter like water over stone. Everywhere Amara went, light followed. Even the courtiers whispered that the young princess carried her mother's grace but with her father's heart. Nandira's heart clenched at every compliment. Her reflection in the golden plates mocked her. An elegant woman, yes, but fading, her smile brittle, her eyes heavy. The whispers in the mirrors had grown quiet lately, but she could still feel them watching, listening from the corners of the hall. Every polished surface seemed alive with memory waiting. The king rose and raised his cup, calling for the ceremonial toast. To the Princess Amara, he declared, his voice strong and proud. May her spirit shine brighter than the mirrors of our land, and may her heart remain pure forever. The guests cheered. Amara, seated beside him, blushed and bowed her head modestly. Then she turned to her mother with a warm, gentle smile. The same smile that had once melted Nandira's heart when she was just a child learning to walk. But tonight that smile burned her. As the attendants filled the goblets with ceremonial wine, Nandira's hand slipped beneath the folds of her gown, her fingers brushing against the small vial hidden there. Inside was the potion given to her by the mirror priestess, a thick, colorless liquid said to erase the light of her reflection. The priestess had warned her, it does not kill, it consumes. It devours what makes one seen. Nandira's mind spun with feverish thoughts. If Amara's beauty vanished, the king's gaze would turn back to her. He would remember who had stood beside him all these years, who had given him a daughter, who had sacrificed her own joy for the crown. The poison trembled between her fingers, the vial slick with sweat. As the music swelled, she waited for her moment. The servants poured the royal cups, the king's first, hers second, Amara's last. Nandira's pulse thundered in her ears. She leaned forward slightly, her hand trembling, and tipped the vial over the princess's goblet. A single drop fell, clear as glass, vanishing into the deep red of the wine. But then Amara looked up. Her eyes, the same soft amber as her father's, met Nandira's. There was no suspicion there, no fear. Only warmth. "Mother," she said softly, the sound of that word piercing deeper than any blade. "Before the feast I went to the temple. I prayed for your happiness." The queen froze, her hand still hovering over the cup. "My happiness?" "Yes," Amara said, her smile glowing like dawn. "I prayed that whatever sorrow shadows your heart, the gods will lift it away. You've carried so much for us, and I want you to find light again." For a moment the world seemed to still. The laughter around them faded, the drums slowed. Nandira's throat tightened, her eyes burning. The cup shook in her hand, the vial slipping between her fingers. She barely noticed as it fell to the floor, shattering silently against her gown. The poison, the last of it, dripped unnoticed into the hem of her sleeve, staining it like invisible blood. Amara reached for her goblet, unaware, and lifted it toward her mother. "To you, mother," she said brightly. "May our love never fade." Nandira's heart cracked. The reflection of her daughter's face shimmered in the cup's silver rim, innocent, trusting, radiant. For an instant she wanted to reach across the table, to take Amara's hand, to beg forgiveness for every dark thought she had harbored. But the whispers returned then, soft as breath against her ear. "She pities you." The words slithered like smoke. "She wants you to believe she forgives you so she can shine even brighter." Nandira's tears fell before she realized she was crying. She lowered her cup, her hand trembling uncontrollably. The guests cheered again as Amara and the king drank, oblivious. The queen remained frozen, watching them through blurred eyes. Her reflection in the goblet wavered, not her face anymore but something hollow and pale with eyes like glass. The poison was gone, spilled, but its seed had already taken root, not in the cup but in her heart. Jealousy had fused with guilt, forming something darker, something living. As the feast carried on around her, Nandira smiled faintly, her lips trembling, and whispered to herself, "She prayed for my happiness." Then her gaze drifted toward the grand mirror at the far end of the hall. For the first time, it did not show her face at all, only Amara's reflection standing where she was not. And deep within that mirror, unseen by all, something stirred. The night was heavy with silence. Beyond the palace walls, the moon hung like a wounded eye, its pale light cutting through the marble corridors of Zuberi. The kingdom that once shimmered with laughter now trembled under the weight of its queen's growing madness. Nandira had not slept in days. She wandered through her chambers like a restless spirit, her reflection following her in every mirror that adorned the golden walls. The whispers had returned, soft, hissing, and cruel. "They all love her, not you," they breathed from the glass. "Even the king's gaze no longer sees you." Each word coiled around Nandira's heart like a serpent. The beauty she once wielded like a weapon had begun to fade, and in its place bloomed a bitterness she could neither hide nor silence. She would stand before her mirror for hours, tracing the faint lines near her eyes, the shadows beneath them. And in the reflection she swore she could see her younger self laughing at her, mocking her decay. But nothing tormented her more than the sound of Amara's laughter. The child's voice, bright and unbroken, floated through the palace halls like sunlight. Every guard, every servant, every noble spoke of her kindness, her grace. The king adored her beyond measure, often lifting her in his arms before the court, his eyes filled with pride. To Nandira that pride was a blade. One afternoon, when the king was away overseeing trade in the southern province, Nandira summoned Amara to her private chamber. The little princess came running, her steps light, her smile pure and trusting. Her hair, dark as the raven's wing, flowed down her back, and her small hands clutched a single white lily, her favorite flower. "Mother," Amara said softly, bowing in her childish way, "Father told me you weren't feeling well. I brought you a flower to make you smile." Nandira's lips trembled. For a fleeting second, her heart wavered. The child's eyes, wide, innocent, unguarded, reflected nothing but love. It was unbearable. Those eyes saw her too clearly. They saw the woman she had become, hollow, envious, fragile. The whisper came again, crawling through her mind like smoke. "She will take everything that was yours." Nandira's breath quickened. "No," she whispered to herself. "No, she cannot." Her trembling hand reached for the mirror shard that lay hidden beneath the silk drapes on her vanity, a remnant from the ritual she had sworn never to use. Its surface shimmered faintly, alive with dark magic. Amara, unaware of danger, stepped closer. "Mother, are you all right?" The queen turned. Her eyes glistened with tears, but behind them burned something fierce and broken. "Come closer, my sweet child," she whispered. "Let me see you, one last time." Amara obeyed, smiling softly. She thought her mother's sorrow was grief, not madness. But when Nandira lifted the shard, her reflection in its surface twisted. Her face became something monstrous, her eyes black and endless. The whisper screamed, "Do it! Blind the light before it blinds you." The queen's scream tore through the night. In one swift, shaking motion, she struck the mirror shard against Amara's eyes. The child's cry echoed through the palace like the breaking of glass. Blood, bright and terrible, streamed down her cheeks, staining the lily she held. Nandira froze. The shard fell from her trembling hand. For a heartbeat, silence returned, heavy, suffocating, unreal. Then came the sound of footsteps, guards shouting, the king's voice thundering through the corridor. He burst through the doors, his cloak flowing behind him like a storm. His eyes went first to the child collapsed on the marble floor, her small hands reaching blindly, her lips whispering, "Father?" Then he saw Nandira. She stood before the great mirror, her reflection fractured and bleeding into 100 pieces. But on her face was a serene, almost holy smile. Her voice was calm, distant, as if she were speaking from another world. "I saved us," she murmured. "She would have destroyed everything with her deceitful beauty. The mirrors told me. I have silenced them now." The king's heart shattered. He fell beside Amara, gathering her into his arms. The sight of his daughter's blood upon his robes tore through him more cruelly than any blade. "What have you done, Nandira?" he cried. "She was your own flesh, your own child." But Nandira only turned to the mirror. "She was never mine," she whispered. "She was theirs, the reflections. I merely freed her from their gaze." As the king carried Amara away, his tears mingling with hers, the queen stared into her reflection. The whispers had stopped, but in the silence, the mirror's surface began to ripple, as if something within was watching her now. And when the dawn came, the servants found her still standing there, smiling faintly at the glass that no longer showed her face, only darkness swirling where her image used to be. The kingdom wept that day, not just for the blinded princess, but for the queen whose heart had been devoured by her own reflection. Darkness was now her kingdom. Queen Nandira sat alone in her chamber, wrapped in silk that did nothing to warm her. Since her punishment, her world had become nothing but sound, scent, and memory. Her eyes, or the place where they once were, ached with phantom pain, as if the mirrors she had lost still watched her from somewhere beyond the veil. At first, the silence of blindness had been unbearable. No flicker of candlelight, no shimmer of gold, no reflection of herself staring back. Just blackness, deep, endless, pulsing like a wound. She would wake from restless dreams screaming for the light, clawing at her face until blood streaked her nails. The maids had stopped coming after one by one they fled her madness. But soon the silence changed. It began with a sound, faint, fragile, almost kind. A soft hum from the far wall of her chamber. It came first at dusk, when the last rays of the sun brushed the silver mirrors that still lined her room. Though she could no longer see them, she felt their presence, heavy, alert, breathing. Then the hum became words. At first she thought they were servants murmuring outside, until the voice grew clearer, sharper, familiar. "Beautiful Nandira, still you shine even in the dark." She froze. Her lips parted in horror. That voice, it was hers. Nandira pressed a trembling hand against the wall, cold beneath her palm. "Who's there?" she whispered. The laughter that answered was unmistakable, her own laughter, twisted, echoing from every corner of the room. "You blinded yourself for beauty, and now you see more than ever." Nandira stumbled back, tripping over her gown. "No, no, this isn't real." But the laughter deepened, rippling like water disturbed. The mirrors on the wall began to hum again, 1,000 soft voices overlapping, whispering her name like a prayer and a curse at once. She covered her ears, but it didn't matter. The sound came from inside her head now. The darkness around her began to shimmer with faint light, not real light but something seen within the mind, a silvery gleam behind her eyelids. Slowly, out of that inner haze, shapes began to form. A face appeared. A child's face. Mara. Her daughter stood before her, not as she remembered but radiant, her blind eyes glowing like two small moons. Her hair rippled as if floating in unseen water. And behind her, faint reflections multiplied, endless mirrors reflecting Amara's gentle face in every direction. "Mother," the vision whispered, "you took my sight. Now I live in yours." Nandira screamed. "No. You are not real. You are dead to me." But the vision did not vanish. It only smiled sadly. "I was never dead, Mother. I was your reflection, the part of you that still loved." Nandira stumbled to her feet, shaking. "Stop haunting me. Leave me alone." But every time she turned, she saw Amara again, closer, clearer, as if the darkness itself had become a mirror reflecting what her soul refused to face. That night, her maids found her kneeling in front of her mirror wall, whispering to herself. They dared not touch her. Her lips were pale, trembling, her hands reaching out to feel the smooth glass she could no longer see. "Show me," she murmured. "Show me my beauty. Show me I am still queen." The glass beneath her fingertips pulsed faintly as though answering her. Then it grew warm, so warm it almost burned. The maids backed away as the queen began to laugh softly, her laughter growing louder until it filled the room. When they returned hours later, the laughter had changed. It was no longer her own. It was the sound of a child. In her blindness, Nandira had begun to see through the eyes of her mirrors, but what they showed her was not the glory she once craved. Every reflection within her mind was distorted, twisted, echoing with images of Amara, her face framed in tears, her eyes bleeding light. Everywhere Nandira turned, she saw her daughter smiling, forgiving, radiant, a light that burned through her guilt. The queen clawed at her eyes, forgetting they were gone, her fingers scraping at the stitched bandages as she screamed into the void. "Stop showing her. Stop showing her." But the mirrors only whispered back. "You cut her eyes and now you see through them. You took her light and now she lights your dark." Days turned into weeks. The servants whispered of strange happenings, of the queen speaking with unseen figures, of her chamber glowing at night with silvery light. They said she no longer ate, no longer slept, that she simply sat before her mirror wall and listened. One night a storm struck the palace. Lightning cracked through the sky, thunder rumbling over the towers. And within her chamber Nandira laughed again, not in joy but in madness. As the wind howled, she lifted her hands to the air and cried, I see everything. Every mirror shows me my sin." The mirrors around her began to shudder. Cracks spread across their surfaces, each one reflecting the same haunting image. Her face, smiling and crying at once, and behind her, the spirit of the daughter she destroyed. When the storm passed, the servants found her lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass. But none dared to touch her, for when they looked into the broken shards, they swore they saw her reflection still smiling, her blind eyes glowing faintly from within the mirror itself. From that night onward, the palace mirrors were said to whisper whenever the queen's name was spoken. And those who dared to gaze too long claimed they saw a pair of sightless eyes watching them from the depths of the glass, eyes that no longer belonged to the living but to the curse that never slept. The great hall of Zuberi was silent. The air hung heavy with grief and vengeance, so thick it was almost hard to breathe. The king sat upon his throne, his golden crown tilted forward, shadowing his eyes. Around him, the nobles, guards, and priests stood in tense silence. Before them knelt Queen Nandira, once radiant, now hollow, her gown torn and stained with blood. Her beauty, even in ruin, was haunting, but her gaze was wild, distant, fixed on some reflection only she could see. At her feet lay the shattered remnants of a child's toy, a mirror once owned by Amara. The princess had survived, but she would never see again. Her small hands, wrapped in bandages, trembled when she reached for her father earlier that morning. Her eyes, covered by white silk, wept though they no longer saw the light. When the king had held her, her tiny voice had broken him completely. "Father," she whispered, "please forgive mother." The voices made her sick. She didn't mean to hurt me. But forgiveness had no place left in the king's heart. He rose slowly from his throne, his expression unreadable, his voice like ice. "Bring forth the queen." 2 guards gripped Nandira's arms, dragging her forward until she knelt at the base of the dais. Her wrists were bound in silver chains, her head bowed. Yet when she lifted her face there was no fear, only a strange, calm smile. "My king," she said softly, "I did what had to be done." The girl's eyes were cursed. "I freed her, and you, from deception." A murmur rippled through the court. The king's knuckles whitened against the armrest of his throne. His voice trembled, though his words were sharp. "You blinded our daughter. You shattered our peace. And now you dare speak of freedom? She was never your daughter," Nandira hissed suddenly, her composure breaking. "The mirrors told me. She was born of deceit, a reflection's child. You never saw the truth because you were too blinded by her false light." The king stood abruptly, descending the steps until he stood before her. His eyes, usually kind, burned with a fury that silenced the hall. "No," he said, his voice breaking. "It is you who were blinded, by envy, by whispers, by your own reflection." He turned to the high priest, an old man draped in ivory robes. "The queen of Zubari has betrayed her blood and her crown. For the sin of defiling innocence, for the madness that devoured her heart, she shall be punished." The priest hesitated. "Your Majesty, what punishment shall cleanse this darkness?" The king's jaw tightened. His voice came low, trembling with anguish. "Take her eyes." The hall gasped. Nandira's smile faltered, just for an instant. "You would do this to me?" she whispered. "After all I've done for you, for our kingdom?" The king's voice thundered, filled with grief more than rage. "So you may never again see beauty you cannot bear." The guards seized her. She struggled, screaming, her voice breaking into sobs that echoed against the marble walls. "No, you cannot take them. They are all I have left, my mirrors, my truth." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The high priest raised his hand, chanting the sacred words of retribution. The room darkened, the candles flickering as though afraid to witness the act. The executioner, face veiled in black, stepped forward holding a silver blade polished to a cold gleam. The king turned away. He could not watch. A scream ripped through the chamber, a sound so raw it seemed to tear through the very stones. Then silence. When the king turned back, Nandira lay still, her eyes gone, her face streaked with tears of blood. The priest murmured a final prayer before wrapping her eyes carefully in silk. "Let them be buried beneath the mirror room," he said solemnly. "Sealed forever so that no reflection may find them again." That evening, under the light of a waning moon, the ritual was carried out. Beneath the grand mirror hall, the heart of Zubari's beauty, a pit was dug. The queen's eyes, wrapped in white cloth, were placed inside a small glass box carved with sacred runes. As the priest lowered it into the earth, he whispered, "May her sight never haunt the light again." The ground was sealed with molten silver, binding the curse beneath the palace. The king stood beside the priest, silent, his face pale as ash. When the final seal was set, he whispered to the grave, "May your reflection never rise again, Nandira." That night, the palace was cloaked in uneasy quiet. Servants hurried through corridors, afraid to look at the mirrors that lined every wall. The queen's body had been taken to the tombs, but the air still hummed with something unnatural, as if the palace itself was breathing. And then at midnight, the first mirror fogged. In the queen's chamber, the grand mirror that once reflected her vanity grew dim. Frost crept across its surface, curling like fingers from the inside. One by one, mirrors throughout the palace followed, clouding, whispering, alive. The guards swore they heard soft voices echoing from the glass. Some said it was Nandira's laughter, others said it was her weeping. But in the king's chamber where he sat beside his sleeping daughter, one whisper rose clearer than the rest, chilling, tender and mournful. It spoke only a single name. Amara. The king froze. The candle flickered. On the mirror before him, a faint outline appeared, the shape of a woman, her face obscured, her empty eyes glowing faintly like twin stars swallowed by mist. And though the king whispered a prayer and covered the mirror with cloth, the voice lingered, soft, sorrowful and endless. From that night on, no mirror in Zubiri ever stayed clear for long. Each would fog at midnight, each would whisper that same name, Amara, as though the buried eyes beneath the palace still sought the light they could never see again. The years moved slowly through the palace of Zubiri, like dust drifting across forgotten mirrors. The once brilliant kingdom, where every hall once glowed with the reflection of gold, had grown dim. Curtains hung heavy to hide what no one wished to see, and the mirrors, once symbols of glory, were now things of fear. It began as a whisper among the maids. A rumor that one mirror in the queen's abandoned chamber had begun to glow faintly at night. Then, a servant polishing the banquet hall mirror screamed that her own face had vanished, replaced by the pale image of a young girl. The guards laughed at first, but the laughter stopped when the same thing happened to them. Every mirror in the palace, great and small, from the royal throne room to the servants' quarters, began to show a single reflection. A child. Princess Amara. Her face appeared not as she had been in life, but as she had looked after the blinding. Her eyes soft but wounded, glowing faintly with white light that seemed neither cruel nor kind. She did not move, did not blink. She simply was, staring outward, her image perfectly still as the living trembled before her. The king was the last to know. For years he had avoided mirrors altogether. He had ordered them covered after the night he buried the queen's eyes beneath the palace floor. But the servants could not keep them all hidden. They filled every wall, every corner of his kingdom, reminders of a beauty he had lost and a horror he could not escape. One morning he stood in his private hall to prepare for the council meeting. The old habit of glancing into the mirror returned to him before he could resist. He wanted to fix his crown to ensure he looked like a king again, a man in control, not one haunted by whispers. When his eyes met the glass, his body froze. The mirror did not show him. It showed her. Amara's face looked back at him through the haze of memory, her features untouched by time, her eyes glowing softly like two moons beneath water. For an endless second the king could not breathe. His crown slipped from his head and clattered to the floor. He staggered back, heart-pounding, whispering, "No, this cannot be, you are gone." But the reflection did not fade. The child's lips parted slightly, and though no sound came, the king swore he heard his name echo faintly inside his head, not from the mirror but from the very air. He tore the mirror down, smashing it against the marble floor. The glass shattered into 100 shards, and in every shard he saw her face again. From that day forward, no corner of the palace gave him peace. Every drop of water that reflected light, every polished metal cup, every gleam of sunlight on marble, held the same faint shape of his daughter's eyes. He ordered the destruction of all mirrors in the kingdom. The artisans cried as their work, centuries of sacred craft, was broken and buried in the earth. But even then the curse did not die. When rainwater filled the cracks in the ground, her face rippled across it. When the moon rose, its glow bent through the palace windows and carved her image into the walls. The people of Zubiri began to whisper that the princess had become the watcher of reflections. Some believed she protected them from deceit. Others feared she sought to remind them that justice had not yet been fulfilled. At night, the king could hear the mirrors sing. It was a soft hum like glass breathing, a sound that rose and fell with his heartbeat. Sleep became impossible. He covered his windows, burned the remaining shards, even ordered priests to bless the palace, but the whispers only grew stronger. "Father?" The first time he heard her voice clearly, he was walking through the royal corridor lined with golden panels. It was faint, almost kind. "Father, why did you not see me?" He turned sharply, his voice breaking. "Amara?" The corridor was empty. But in the reflection of his own sword, her face stared back at him. Not angry, not vengeful, only unbearably sad. He dropped the sword. The guards found him kneeling, shaking, whispering apologies to no one they could see. In the following weeks he stopped attending court. He refused food, pacing his chambers in silence, muttering to himself. The servants heard him speaking to his reflection as if to a ghost. Sometimes he begged. Sometimes he shouted. But mostly he wept. The kingdom suffered for it. With the king consumed by madness, the court fractured, nobles turning on one another for power. And all the while the mirrors multiplied. No one knew how. Some swore they appeared overnight, emerging from walls, from puddles, from still air. Each one showed Amara. And her eyes, her empty, glowing eyes, followed them all. In the villages, people covered their windows with cloth. Children refused to fetch water from the well because they swore the surface whispered their names. The queen's old chamber became a place of legend. No one dared enter it, for they said if you stepped inside, you would see not your face but your soul. The king grew thinner, paler, his once commanding voice now trembling like a frightened child's. He began to wander the halls barefoot, murmuring, "I see you, my daughter. I see you in every face." And he was right. Even when he looked at others, his servants, his guards, the few loyal men who remained, their reflections in the polished floor bore not their own faces but Amara's. It was as though the mirrors themselves had grown hungry, devouring the living, feeding only on the memory of the innocent. By the 3rd year of the curse, the palace was silent. The king had sealed himself in the throne room, where a single massive mirror remained behind the dais. He had ordered it destroyed many times, yet it always reappeared. He sat before it now, trembling, his beard long and gray, his crown tarnished. When he finally dared to look up, his reflection was gone. Only Amara remained. She smiled, and for the first time the king realized she was not haunting him out of vengeance but out of mercy. She had not come to curse him. She had come to make him see what blindness truly was. And as he whispered her name through tears, the mirror trembled softly, glowing with warmth. But outside the chamber, the servants who heard his cries swore that when they looked upon the throne room door, it reflected no one at all, as if the mirror within had finally swallowed the king whole.